So I just want to tell you a little bit about the Regional Building Damage Assessment Project. Several others are going to mention parts of it, so there's just two pieces that I want to show. Oh, I need the clicker and I need to be able to use it. That didn't go well. Okay. I'm just going to run you through quickly what the objectives were. I first wanted to get the building officials to talk to the emergency managers. And I can see that the building officials are pretty well connected to each other, but not necessarily with the emergency managers. And so we had a kind of steering committee, and these people really helped me figure out where we needed to go on things. And several of them are in the room. I'm looking around. And so Kimberly was there from Beaverton, and Kimberly there, yeah, and Dan was on it for representing municipalities, and then representatives from each of the 5 counties. So we convened virtually, and by the way, guys, we need to have at least one more meeting before this is over, because I have a habitability policy that I'm hoping that you'll review. But that's the first thing we did. And then the second thing was, I had this idea of things that I'd heard that we needed to do for building damage assessment, but it was kind of all in my head. And so we went out and talked to all these kind of folks to kind of say, this is what we're thinking of doing. Are we missing anything? Should we do more? I think a lot of you were part of that. And we did work up a document that kind of reflected what we heard from people. And we did find that there were some things missing, but mostly it looked like we were in the right track. This is kind of a result slide of that we have completed both those 2 objectives. And I did want to say that down here under webinars, we did, I think Tim mentioned mutual aid agreements. And we did a webinar on a mutual aid agreement and a stranded worker agreement, which is on the website that Darren showed us. But that is to say that almost every municipality here is part of the MORE agreement. It's hosted by Yamhill County. So y'all are all part of that, and it isn't even limited to emergencies. You can just share resources, mutual aid, and then there's something at the state level, there's something regionally that includes British Columbia. So we're really well covered in mutual aid agreements. What we're not well covered in is most people don't know what we have or how to access it. But I did research that, and there's a webinar that kind of says, this is how you do it, here's the links, all of that. So that's underneath that. Objective 3 was to support the development of ORSAP, and Kristen's going to talk about this later. We're a lot of the way there, but of course the closer we get, the more we think, oh, we got to do this, we got to do that. And she'll talk about that. One of the things I wanted to do was that once we got ORSAP developed, we'd figure out something regionally for our 5 counties of how are we going to do this? Is there a way we can coordinate? So, because we're the kind of elephant in the room as far as the state is concerned, and if we could coordinate with ourselves, it would be less of a burden on the state, and we might be able to share resources. We really didn't get to address that at all because it was a much bigger lift to do ORSAP than we realized. So then the 4th objective was to develop these certain tools. And the 3 that are in red are ones that we just were not able to do for various reasons. And the 4, John is going to talk about the first one. I'm just going to talk to you about the stranded worker agreement. Greg is going to talk to you about EQUIP, and I'm going to talk to you about the public messaging. So I'm going to skip through these slides because we're going to discuss it, but you'll be able to see these slides if you want to go back and say, now what did she say? So we have developed a stranded worker agreement for building-related workers. What I would like you to know is there's already a stranded worker agreement in the region for emergency operations center workers. People signed it back in 2016 or 17, and it's never been heard of again. But RDPO is managing it, and I think when we get the operating procedures for the one we're doing, they'll probably be aligned, and that will be easier. But so a stranded worker agreement, this is what we got. It allows, let's say that I was qualified to inspect buildings and that I lived in Beaverton and worked for the city of Portland. So the earthquake happens at night and I'm stuck in Beaverton. It means that I can go respond to Beaverton if I can't get across the bridge and come to Portland. So you can respond in the jurisdiction you're in and help them out. If you think about that logistically, it means that people need to sign the stranded worker agreement, both where their staff live, with groups that where their staff live. And so we've got all the counties, Columbia County has signed, but all the counties are in the signatory process. City of Portland is going to council next week on this. And it's also an agreement for many people who live in Yamhill County outside that can sign it. But I'm thinking it's a little bit of a logistic nightmare, because if, let's say I lived in Yamhill County, then we need to figure out who in Yamhill County and get them to sign it so that we can do this. And it also really only comes into play for that 2 or 3 week period of time right after the earthquake, where you have the most intense need for help and your transportation is the most limited, where you probably got issues with communication, and we definitely have roads and bridges that we can't cross. So it's something that'll be really helpful for a short period of time for people who are qualified to be able to support wherever they are. And as I looked at the GIS location of all the 150 qualified inspectors in the city of Portland, 40% live outside the city. So we want people to sign this. And we want to know who lives in our city so that they can come help us. But it's a fairly simple agreement, and it really depends on, for instance, us as the city. If somebody who actually worked for Sandy but lives in Portland comes to us to report, it's the receiving agency that decides, do I need more people or do I need somebody with that set of skills? And it's not limited to just building safety evaluators, but it would include, you know, if you're an IT person or a GIS person, or you did permitting, or you were related, it's building related is the code. So that is being circulated, and there's a standard operating procedure for how it will work, but it's still in the early days of signatories. Any questions about that? All of that information is up on the website also. So John is gonna, did I just go backwards? I believe I did. Okay. This just tells you where we're at. I think I just talked you through that. This is one that we weren't able to do, but I'm working on this for the city on how we prioritize where we go first for the buildings. And both Tim and Ross have said it's kind of obvious, you go to essential facilities first, and that is probably the easy part of it. But in a city with 206,000 buildings, there's all these others that are not essential facilities and are not residences and are commercial. And would you do the grocery stores before you do the pharmacies, or would you do the gas stations before? It's those kind of decisions. So I'm working on that, and I've consulted with a number of other people to understand better about priorities and what they're going to need. Greg is going to talk about this emergency quick inspection program, and it's modeled on BORP, which you just heard about from Laurel. So, but the trick to equip is that it requires applications before an emergency. It doesn't operate during an emergency. Hopefully people are inspecting their buildings, but you don't do applications at that time. And one of the really challenging things is that it's the authority having jurisdiction, so it's each municipality that has to implement this. We can't do one for the whole region and then force people to follow our rules. So there's a kind of developmental piece there that has been challenging. Okay, I think Greg is going to talk to you about this. And this was a GIS worker, which kind of got held up, it turns out, I think maybe for political reasons, but I think there will be a GIS working group that is starting up regionally that will not just do building safety evaluations and damage assessments, but if you think about it, there's a ton of other reasons that you would want a regional GIS group that shared information, and so that we knew that Clackamas County had this kind of thing and Washington County has this kind of thing, and that shared. So we hope that that will get going. That's a much broader effort than my little project. And the last thing that I want to tell you, which I'm really excited about, Sandra has worked on this for maybe a year, I think, is that we've developed a bunch of messaging that would go out to the public about building safety. So we have a document about the placarding and evaluation process, and we, Matt and Terry from the City of Portland have reviewed this for, like, technically, did we make stuff up or is it right? And so we think we're safe to say these things, which I appreciate. And then we've had somebody from the messaging group, and we've done some accessibility tests to make sure, like, is this as simple as we can possibly make it and still be technically accurate? So we have 4 documents, one on placarding and evaluation, one on just general building safety. Like if you're waiting for that rapid safety evaluation person to come around and you're there and you can't figure out if it's safe to go back in your building, here, you know, this is what you might look for in the roof and this is what you might look for in the walls and things like that. And then there's another one that is really about those specific vulnerable building types, most of which we heard from for her, but what are the specific vulnerabilities in those that you would want to watch for if you were in that kind of building. And the 4th topic is really, it's kind of this habitability question. We have rules for how many outlets you have to have, and you have to have running water and things, but if we want a bunch of people to shelter in place, how are we going to amend those rules and what are we going to tell people about sheltering in place? So this document has some information about water and electricity and gas and things like that, of like, and then the 2-bucket toilet sanitation solution. So it's just basic information if you need to shelter in place. And we also, and there's also, as I mentioned before, kind of more of a policy document that I think cities and counties want to think about ahead of time of how do we want to change our habitability requirements at the public level after an event like this, so people can shelter in place and what is safe. So these are all public. These are for the public documents and will come out in about 13 languages, and then that other is more of a policy document that we're trying to develop, that then at the municipal level you have to see if it's useful to you. And the last thing is that every year RDPO usually does ATC 20 training. And I just want to say, because we've bandied this about a lot, ATC 20, as Tim mentioned, is this method that pre-existed most of the state emergency systems. And it's a method, ATC 20 is a method for looking at buildings that have been affected by an earthquake, and ATC 45 is to look at buildings that have been affected by wind or flooding. And we have manuals back there if any of you don't have enough and you need some. But all of those, that method, which is the technical method of looking at, can be trained on, but it's usually wrapped around a state system. And that's why you've heard us talk about ORSAP and WASAFE and Cal OES SAP. Those are all state emergency systems that says this is how we do it in our state. And it, as somebody mentioned, sometimes it adds some hazmat stuff. So our goal was to make sure that there was more training available, and and we did a training, we sponsored a training here at BDS, we being Darren, who did most of the work. We did that virtually online January 2022, and then WASAFE just did a training in Vancouver in person this last April, and we are financially supporting Clackamas County, who's doing 3 online trainings, and 2 of them have been completed, and in your packet is a handout. That there's one next week, so if you know any people that need it, it's free. They told me they still have the openings, so if people want to take that training, sign up for it next week. Now, those trainings are all in Cal OES SAP, so you basically get the ATC 20 training, and then you find out about the California system, because that's really what we've been using all of these years. And then Kristen is going to talk about the development of ORSAP, but to make it more confusing, Chris Wong, who's out in Hillsborough, and Dave Terry's have developed exactly the ORSAP module for what is our state system that wraps around the ATC 20. And they are offering, this is about a 60-minute to 90-minute module that they're doing either at 9 a.m. or at lunches, and they're, in your packet is a list of all of those trainings that you could sign up for if you just want to get, that's just the ORSAP piece of it. So we're really going to encourage all these guys to also do the ORSAP piece so that they get into Kristen's database, and we're good to go. So those are all the things that we kind of tackled in this project. And I think, oh, look at how I just cannot go in one direction. So that's kind of what we have been working on for the last couple of years, and all the documentation is up on that website at RDPO, like all the webinars and PowerPoints and all of that are there. Though I am happy to take any questions if there's something that you didn't know about or this is new.